AP Government. This is the start for the second section of our Foundations unit, which corresponds a lot with what is Chapter 2 in the textbook. A lot of what we have here, I'll be going pretty fast. If you were in AP US History, a lot of this will be a repeat of what you would have had in AP US History. If you were not in AP US History, you need to take a little bit more time to go deeper into the reading in the textbook there. All right, this section we're going over about the foundations there, but the influences of American government. And I'm going to quickly go through some of these things. We did have influences with the direct and indirect democracy with the Greeks and the Romans, direct by like Athens and Greece, and then the Republic of the Romans was for indirect or representative democracy. A lot of things look and see that the Western philosophy for government starts in 1215 with Magna Carta, when the king will give up his power. Now, it's not to the masses, it is to just the nobles, but this is where there is going to be some of this giving up of power there that the people get in return. Some of the ideas that we're going to look at for the social contract. The ideas of trial by jury, due process, just compensation, all things in our Bill of Rights were in the Magna Carta. Parliament, we will be copying a lot of stuff that Britain has. Parliament has an upper and lower house. We'll have an upper and lower house there. Now, this is something I will spend more time in class about. You see this absolutely beautiful timeline. On the side, there would be the other graph, but I know there's nothing on that axis. But what the idea is as for England over time, we have things in world history, agriculture, economics, and government all come together. So for about 200 years, the population grew in England, and pretty much at a pretty corresponding rate, so did the grain production, thus the prices did. But after they ran out of the amount of land to keep expanding, and then each part of the land was producing less, there was less grain production, which scarcity in economics, it caused the price to go up. When the king was asking for more from the nobles, that is when the nobles then got in return the Magna Carta there. Now you see a little bit further down here, they'll notice in here, this is when the Black Plague hits. There are 5 Enlightenment philosophers that you must know, not be familiar with, must know. The first is Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes was a person that had wrote that we human beings have to have government. If we do not have government, we will act like animals, or as he wrote, we have a beastly nature. I know none of you have that. If you at our school, I mean, if you go to the cafeteria, if we didn't have the administration as the government, everybody would be polite to each other. No, you go first, pick up after themselves. But you know, not everyone acts as well as we do. Montesquieu is one that we were going to come back to in the very near future with the Constitution. Montesquieu wrote that we need to have a government in which powers are separated. Also, with the separation of power, we need to make sure that there are checks and balances to make sure that no one person or group of people get too much power. Voltaire, you did not have as much in your 7th grade civics class as you would have had with Montesquieu and some of the others we'll have here, but he wrote about freedoms. Now, a lot of things that he has for America that we don't look as much for the religious freedom, but we do in the idea that there should not be an established church. The intellectual freedom is something that we sometimes miss, but we will protect that in our government early on with the ideas of patents and copyrights, that you should be rewarded for what you do. John Locke we will be coming back to, and very soon when we talk about the Declaration of Independence. John Locke says that human beings have a natural right. He wrote about this in the True Treatise of Civil Government, but we're going to see that Thomas Jefferson takes his ideas. Rousseau will write the social contract, which will say that people in government will give up a little bit but protect each other. Now, part of this idea, which Locke will take for the social contract, is the idea that the government is supposed to protect those natural rights. And that is where in our Declaration of Independence, we have the idea of consent of the governed. The next part, going through pretty fast, is where for a lot of the ideas that we have in our government, they are definitely not original. We have the English Bill of Rights and the Petition of Rights from the 1600s, which a lot of these things are ideas that we think were America. No, they did not come about in the 1770s and 1780s. No taxation without Parliament's consent was not the Paxton Boys there with no taxation without representation. That comes about from British. The restrict housing of the military and private homes, much like our Third Amendment, guarantees trial by jury there, which is our Seventh Amendment. The criticizing the king is the petition part of the First Amendment. And the Bill of Rights, free elections, fair and speedy trial like our Sixth Amendment, no excessive bail or cruel and unusual punishment like our Eighth Amendment, right to petition the king, and like the First Amendment. Suspension of public laws prohibited, which we have in the original Constitution with the writ of habeas corpus. Our problem that a lot of our citizens had was the fact that we did not were not given these rights and treated like Englishmen. Now, our government, I know this is just a list. In class, I will give you, it's a chart in which I have, there's this tree, but where did the roots of our government come from? And it was a variety of things. Again, we just did not decide in the very beginning for what we had. We have our early colonial governments like the Charter or the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, the Virginia Charter, early representation with the House of Burgesses there. Even though it was just the elite, it does have some sort of representative government. The Mayflower Compact with the ideas of the rule by majority but protection of minority. The Toleration Act, which we'll have for religious freedom. Later on, Roger Williams with liberty of conscience and the idea of religious. The body of liberties, the Bill of Rights that colonies had. The Peter Zenger case with the idea for freedom of the press. The United States, this is where the history side comes in. You don't have to know it in depth for the government, but we didn't just pop up and make the Constitution. There's a lot of basis on it. The Continental Congress, the Declaration of Independence, all the different states with their governments, their Bill of Rights that they had. Our first government, the Articles of Confederation that we'll have later in this section, was not a success, but we did have things to build on it. During the time that the Articles of Confederation had, we have two monumental laws that you're going to have to know with the Land Ordinance and the Northwest Ordinance. The Northwest Ordinance is still the process for admission for new states. So this is where the overall question comes is, was our government unique? No, we took bits and pieces. That's what actually part of the remarkable thing of what some of our framers of our Constitution, our founding fathers did, where they were able to take different parts and put them together. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. There. This is Thomas Jefferson, where we're going to look at for the Declaration of Independence. And I was like with that idea. So. All right, we did not suddenly in July of 1776 decide, oh, we're going to be a new country. It was a process. Our unity would go. And again, this is where the history that you would have had a lot more in depth in AP U.S. history, when the Dominion of New England and several of the colonies joined together. During the French and Indian War, when Ben Franklin tried to get more of the colonies to join together, and the old join or die snake there. The Stamp Act Congress, where we have multiple colonies come together to protest the Stamp Act. The First Continental Congress, which most of the colonies showed up, and one of the big things they had is their plan for the Second Continental Congress. In between the two will be Lexington and Concord. That is where in the Second Continental Congress we will have the Declaration. Now, the history side of the Declaration is something that you do need to be familiar with, and then we're going to also break it apart. In class, we will do more looking at the Declaration in depth. John Adams had been trying to propose a declaration for a while, and most of the people in the Second Continental Congress were not wanting to do it. Finally, they made a coalition, and Richard Henry Lee from Virginia will make the proposal. He will then go off back to Virginia to be governor. They will then put together a committee of 5 to write it. The names you probably recognize are Adams, Franklin, Jefferson, but you need to know Roger Sherman and Robert Livingston. Later on, Roger Sherman is going to be important in history with our Connecticut Compromise. He's kind of even though he was not highly educated and book smart, very much of a practical person and very intelligent. in that matter. Robert Livingston was going to be famous with also famous founding father later on with Louisiana Purchase. Now, I know when you all do group projects, everybody does an equal amount there, but sometimes some groups you'll have one person that does more, and this work was put upon Jefferson. And we usually give him credit for writing it. But did he really? And this is where, yes, he did actually an incredible piece of writing, but he took the ideas that we have from John Locke and other Enlightenment writers. He took it from individual colonies, some of them that had declared independence. Some towns like Fayetteville, North Carolina had declared independence. So he took these ideas when he wrote it. And then the Continental Congress spent multiple days breaking it apart, arguing over little things along the way. While they were working on this, Abigail Adams and John Adams were writing back and forth. And we know some of the process, but we also know where Abigail Adams had said to John Adams that as you are making this new government, make sure that you remember the ladies, which of course Thomas Jefferson did. Isn't that the all men are created equal? Isn't that mankind? Or is it? Now, history-wise, you go more into the issues that caused problems in passing the Declaration, whether it be fishing rights that New England colonies had with the Canadian colonies there, all kinds of little grievances, but the largest one that had to be overcome was the issue of slavery. All men are created equal, written by Thomas Jefferson, who was a slaveholder, but also found that slavery in his heart was wrong, but he also liked to live his lifestyle, and the only way to have that wealthy lifestyle was by his slaves. For the Declaration of Independence, you need to know with John Locke, again, the two treatises of government that he wrote, but he said that people have natural rights. Now, natural rights are the rights that are God-given rights, or that no matter what the government is, these are things that you would have. He also writes about the fact that like a social contract, that you consent to some things with the government, but the government is supposed to protect those rights. Now, his rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit, property. Wow. Was there maybe a little plagiarism? Not really. Again, these ideas that we have. Jefferson takes these ideas, and as we see with what will be one of the longest sentences you see, and then the second part of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, as one of my poli-sci professors has said, outlocks Locke. The different parts of the Declaration. The beginning is the introduction there, and then there's the preamble. The preamble may be the most famous line in all of the world for government documents, with we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. The largest part of the Declaration is a whole list of grievances. I always say the Declaration is like a breakup letter, and we tell the king, it's your fault, not ours. You did this, this, and this. At the very end, we'll come back to this on the last month of September and there, but one of the lines that is just powerful when you look back and then you see what actually happened is where they pledged their lives, their sacred honor, their fortune, and then the 56 men that signed it. Think right now, how many of those 56 men do you know the names of? Some that you're thinking maybe didn't. We had our committee of 5 with Adams, Jefferson, Franklin, Sherman, Livingston. Most of you know of John Hancock, but who else? Not George Washington, he wasn't there. Not Alexander Hamilton, he wasn't there. Not James Madison, he wasn't there. Most of the names are ones you don't recognize, and many of them did give their lives, their sacred honor, their fortunes, after they signed what could be a death sentence for them if we did not win the Revolutionary War, but some did not see it or lost family, homes along the way. The opening of the Declaration of Independence, and you see some of the areas that are underlined or bolded in here. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Yes, that's one sentence. Those of you that had Mr. Harper for English, yes, Mr. Harper would have loved Thomas Jefferson as a student for what he aimed for. But here's where he's telling, notice the laws of nature, so natural rights idea. Then the most famous lines, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Yeah, that's a lot in a very short amount. This is where, again, where I said it's a lot of times people look at this is that where Jefferson outlocks locks and his idea, consent of the government, unalienable rights in there. Okay, our first government that we have in the United States was the Articles of Confederation. As the war was going on, the 13 colonies had to go. So it was our official government from 1781 to 1789. Key thing to remember, it favored the states' rights over that of the central government. Where we had for Confederation before, this is where the Confederation is a loose union of states. It was by the Second Continental Congress, it was made weak on purpose. Why is that? We did not like a powerful central government. That's what we were breaking away from. It took a while for it to ratify. Some of you may have noticed the 1781. Okay, why did it take so long after we declared independence? Here's where, if you look at this map and the history of it, you'll see where these colonies were claiming land all the way to the Mississippi River. A lot of the smaller states like New Jersey, Rhode Island, Delaware, they felt like they were getting locked in. They were already trapped and they did not want to become even smaller. So what we ended up doing is making a compromise saying that we will then make it where future states will be able to be made. That is where later on we will make the land ordinance and the Northwest ordinance for this. We look at it and say it's the first government, but we got rid of it, so it must be a failure. No, there are some good things that come about it. First of all, it succeeded in what our initial purpose was. We united together. We were able to win the Revolutionary War, and we are then able to get our independence truly by other countries with the Treaty of Paris 1783. The land ordinance, Northwest ordinance that we are going to go over were very successful things that were built on. And it gives us a base for us to build the government on. Now the land ordinance, here's where you might have those within history that we have on here. The land ordinance would go and we will survey the land that was out west. And this is where we will make townships of 6 miles by 6 miles. And then we will split those up into different sections there. Later on, we will use this basis for the Homestead Act and history there. We will also go, and one of these sections was when it was sold, the money for that land was supposed to be used for schools. Now, this is where, when we look at things, that we look at it and say, well, why does that matter today? We're not selling the land for it. Here's where we look for original intent. Original intent is, what did our founding fathers originally think when they wrote things? Our Articles of Confederation did not have a whole lot of things that they had. Again, the government was made weak on purpose. But when you look for original intent, there, our founding fathers said that schools, education was something that should be provided for. So that's why some people say it's part of Amendment 9 with our other rights that we have in there. The Northwest Ordinance. Oh, here's what a key thing was for this money, this land, is as it was sold, it was only one of the few sources of income or revenue for the United States government. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Now, for government-wise, this gave the rules for new states to come into it. There. And then when the land was sold, again, the money was given to this. It was a temporary solution towards where we needed revenue to come in for the United States. In U.S. history, you would have studied with the Northwest Ordinance, written by Thomas Jefferson, who that land would be free. So going back to original intent, This is where we looked at our founding fathers and Thomas Jefferson as we expanded to not have slavery expand here. This map kind of shows, and where you see, like, this is a section for Ohio as it was divided up. You have the townships there. Later on, again, they're divided up into different sections. And the reason why I show this is if you fly over some of the areas out west, you will see a whole bunch of squares and rectangles on there. Now, you notice these circles. No, those are not crop circles.